Learn the most advanced recruiting techniques. Land the most desirable talent. Launch your company towards massive success. This is the Higher Power Radio Show with Rick Girard.
Look, I just need to hire someone who can do work so we can get this product out the door, said Peter, a CEO of a newly founded startup, or funded startup, I should say. Besides, there's no way to really know if somebody fits into the company until you experience working together. Guys, this is not true at all. Your interview process, when properly structured, will give you the evidence to support making the right hire each and every time. Because as we all know, one bad hire can destroy your company. Today, we're talking about the power of digging deep on the right questions and utilizing AI to confirm your conclusions. I'm Rick Girard, and welcome to the Higher Power Radio Show. We share insights from top-performing rebel entrepreneurs, disruptors, and industry experts like our guest today, Mr. Scott Sandland. He is the founder and CEO of Cyrano AI. You know what? You've said that to me 8 times, and I told you I was going to botch up.
That's all right. that is the other variation of our name we get a lot.
Cyrano.ai. Scott is the former world's youngest hypnotherapist. A few companies and a few decades later, he is the CEO of a company focusing on artificial empathy and strategic linguistics. As a former executive director and CEO of a mental health clinic and longtime technologist, he has experience leading purpose-driven organizations and has been published in numerous peer-reviewed journals, Psychology Today, Forbes, and Entrepreneurial Magazine, which is what makes Scott the perfect expert for today's topic. Scott, welcome to the Higher Power Radio Show today.
Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you. All right, so we're going to discuss a couple things. We're going to talk about getting to the truth of who a person is, especially in your video interviews, because a lot of companies today are having challenges with video interviews and getting the right data out of them.
Totally.
And we're going to talk about how to leverage AI to confirm your hiring decisions. Sound like a plan?
Yep.
All right, let's get started. So I find today companies have an interview process that's really no better than a coin toss. And there's no process. It's fairly shallow. They ask common questions that people are used to getting. And it's centered in around, how can you help me?
Right.
It doesn't really have anything to do with, how can you help that person? It doesn't have anything to do with whether or not that person even fits your cultural values at all. It's just what skills do you bring to the table and how can you get it done?
Yeah. So you're looking at like a checklist of like which things you want to have happen. And the person you're interviewing is obviously like on guard and like putting on a show and trying to be their best version of themselves. But it's difficult for a person, unless they're really putting in the effort, to dig deeper in terms of the culture fit and the soft skills fit that person's going to bring to the job, which really makes the difference on if they're a good hire or not.
That's true. And, I find a lot of companies just don't know what the culture is.
Sure.
They just, especially if you're an entrepreneur and you're a startup and you're trying to get work out the door, you have no idea.
And so when I was the CEO of a mental health clinic, the Newport Clinic, it's over by Newport Harbor High School. And we were doing a lot with at-risk teens and stuff like that and in drug rehab centers. And we started during Obamacare, like during that rollout, when all of a sudden there was a ton of money in healthcare. And so all of a sudden there was just this flood of people needing help and that could now afford it. And so we were hiring as fast as we could. And that meant we were looking at resumes and checklists. And we said, okay, this is a person who's an MFT. We need a marriage and family therapist. This is a person who's a LCSW. We need one of those. And they'd come in, we talked to them for a few minutes and we'd hire them. And sometimes it worked out great. And other times 2 weeks in, we were like, oh, this is the worst decision. And how can we just schedule this person's hours away from my hours, which are most of the hours for the clinic? So it's real easy, especially when traction is kicking off and people are excited and busy. It's real easy to just say, oh, anybody with the skills is good enough. We just need someone who can do the job. That doesn't work.
No, it doesn't work at all. I mean, I feel like if it does work, it's because you got lucky.
Totally.
That's it.
Yeah.
And so let's explore that a little bit. So what was your pain point that you kind of realized, hey, look, there's a little bit more to this than than meets the eye.
Yeah. So ultimately, like when I was doing that job, I was hiring therapists, and it was everywhere from psychotherapist to life coach, everywhere in between. And figuring out that, like I said, the soft skills were more important. Like their ability to just connect with the clients and work on a team were way more important than their certifications and licensures.
Say that again, because that's
Sure.
really an important point.
Yeah. So it was less about how much training they had, less about which credentials they had, and much more about how they fit and how well they could relate to the clients. Like we had a person that we hired who was, on paper, she had a ton of boxes checked. She's an intelligent woman. She's very talented. And I set her up, gave her 3 clients the first day, and she bombed all 3 clients. All 3 clients said, we want our money back and we're never coming back.
Wow.
And she's a qualified person. She just did not connect with our customers even remotely. And you just go, okay, well, there it is.
Yeah. And so when you're talking about a business that's customer oriented like that, were you able to capture any of them back at least?
Those 3 women, those 3 clients walked and never came back. And
that can destroy your business. One bad hire.
And they were,
imagine if you lined her up with 10 that day.
And they were influential. Like I think back to the amount of money I lost that morning before lunch. Like it was so much money for a startup clinic that was bootstrapped, and to have those 3 people, because one of them was absolutely a local influential person. And if she had hit it out of the park, we would have had our phone ringing for 20 more sessions by the end of the day. And instead, crickets.
See, this ties around why this is important to your company. Why should me as a startup founder, why should I care about this really? Like I just have work that I need to get done.
Because ultimately hiring the wrong person that checks the boxes, again, just going back to that, like a person who's qualified but doesn't work for the company costs the company so many cycles and so much stress and so much inefficiency that rapport and that teamwork is critical. And I'm a big sports guy. I'm a big teams guy. And so you can see that often in sports where a guy gets traded to the wrong team or gets drafted by the wrong team, and he just doesn't fit culturally in the locker room, and how big a problem that can be for an entire organization.
Oh yeah. And
those are guys who are, it's sports, you keep score, right? So like, if the guy's good or not. You're like, okay, the ball went in the basket every time, or, he scored 3 touchdowns. He's good. But when a guy doesn't fit on a team, this just happened in the NBA last season where they traded Jimmy Butler to the Heat, and they said, this guy's no good. This guy's no good. They traded him to the Heat, and he was in the NBA Finals that season. And he just said, I found the team that wants to win as much as I do. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah. And where it gets dangerous too is that a lot of job seekers are kind of desperate for a job, unfortunately. And so you're not always getting the truth out of the interview process. So if you're running a typical kind of get to know you interview process where you go have lunch, you're getting kind of the best self, especially if you're not digging deep enough with interview questions, or doing what we're going to talk about in a few minutes, confirming or gaining insight into who that person really is. You're no better than a coin toss.
Yeah. And if you ask an applicant, like, why do you want to work for our company? The true answer is because I have a mortgage to pay, right? Like they want to get, and ideally they want to work at a place where they're going to fit, but they want to get paid. They want to be employed. And so they're like their hierarchy of needs. They'll say, I want a job. And then once I have a job, I want a good job where I fit. So if that person's already employed in a place and is making an upgrade, they're going to maybe be more honest about who they are and what they're looking for and where that fit's going to be. But if they don't have a good job right now, their incentives are aligned for them to just try to be what they think you want rather than try to be who they really are.
Well, yeah, that's 100% true. Well, I found though, what's interesting is that if you look at people who are even in jobs, but they're unhappy at that job, they're not necessarily always honest as well.
Totally.
So you have a little bit of that challenge as well. You have to get past that. You have to get under the hood to understand who the person is.
Yeah.
And why this is important too. But I will disagree a little bit where ultimately there are people who are career minded, maybe keeping their eye off the salary ball as long as you can might be beneficial to you as opposed to like focusing in on that as a qualifier.
That should be what they do. Yeah. And when they do that, that's great.
Yeah.
But too often they don't.
Well, us as interviewers, it's our responsibility to do that, to lead them down that path.
Sure.
Because if I understand you and what's important to you outside of the money, then I can really make an assessment of whether or not you're a good fit for
Right.
my organization.
Yeah.
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 And I'm a good fit for you.
Right. Right. And knowing, like, that was another thing that happened at the clinic a lot was my clinical director, his management style and my management style were very different. And so there were certain people where one of us would just be totally hands off because we knew that, oh, if I manage this person, these are the outcomes that we don't want, that are totally avoidable if we just have Richard manage that person, and vice versa.
Yeah.
And so knowing that person and knowing yourself means not just when you're hiring them, also when you're picking who you're going to hire, you have a strategy of, oh, this person will work well under this manager where the space is, not just culturally in the whole, corporation, but, in the specific role with the specific team they're going to be on.
All right, you're listening to the Higher Power Radio Show. I'm your host, Rick Girard. And for our podcast listeners, we're going to take a quick educational moment from our sponsors. Hey, check out higherpowerradio.com. There you'll find additional content and resources to help you land great hires. Our guest today is Scott Sandland. He's the founder and CEO of
Cyrano. It's like Cyrano de Bergerac.
I want to say Cryano. I don't know why, but apparently I can't read today.
That's all right.
Yeah, Cyrano.ai, and we're discussing why it's important, number one, to get to the truth of a person on a video interview. Now let's talk about video interviews, because I think, now you're in a situation where you're adding another layer on top of the fact that you can't see somebody in an environment. You could, I think the possibility, if you conduct a normal interview and you can't really read body language, or somebody's kind of hiding that because you're only seeing from here up,
sure,
it's going to put you in even more of a detriment or highly elevate the possibility that you're going to probably make a bad hire.
Yeah. I mean, it increases the risk there a lot because you can't read the room the same way. Like when two people are in a room, there's a whole bunch of subjective things that humans have evolved to be good at assessing, just for survival. It's there.
Yeah.
And via, call it Zoom. So you're now interacting with a screen, but you're also like staring at the camera. So you're not even like, you're doing this thing where like you're looking back and forth, like at their face, and then at the little dot on the top of your laptop. And you're doing this constantly, which means you're and you're seeing yourself. So now there's like all these layers of distraction that you don't normally have in a face-to-face interview. Cause like when I do a Zoom session, I'm like, oh, that's what everyone sees in my background. That's the back of my room. Oh, that's my haircut. Oh, that's my whatever. And so I'm seeing myself, which I normally don't do when I'm conversing with people.
Yeah.
And so there's just all these layers that make it more difficult to do a good job of understanding and getting to know a person virtually.
Yeah. Tons of distractions.
Yeah.
That makes it that much harder. All right. So let's talk about what we need to build into a company, right? So let's break down, if you could. So let's talk a little bit about your product.
Sure.
So what do you guys do?
So what we do is we analyze words. And we analyze words and phrases in context that allow us to understand a person. So we understand, we create psychographic profiles on a person. So that means we understand their current mental state, which means not sentiment analysis, not like, are they in a good mood or in a bad mood? We understand this person is being logical. This person is being driven by problems and solving needs. This person is driven by X, Y, and Z. So we can measure that, and then we can measure their priorities. So this person is ego and instinct centric. This person is data and process centric, etc. And a bunch of other things.
And this is based off reading their social profiles.
This is based off
or resume.
Yeah, it could be their resume. It could be a Zoom conversation. So right now we're in Zoom, and you can just do a Zoom call like you normally would, and our system will take that Zoom call and run a report on everybody who was on the call and talk about what it would take to have both the people on the call work well together. So it's, here's this person, here are their priorities, here's how committed they are, and here's the next steps you should have with this person. And here's, if you want to work with them, how to get the most out of them.
Yeah, see, I find that more valuable than an assessment. I'm not a big fan of most assessments because I feel like most companies lean on that as the main decision-making tool.
Yeah.
And that's only meant to be a confirmation tool, right?
And
to confirm whatever your judgment of that person might be.
Sure. And there's DISC and Myers-Briggs and any of those things. They're fine with the caveat that you aren't one person. Like, who you are is very context dependent.
Yeah.
So if, like, who you are with your kid is very different than who you are like with a customer or a client or a coworker. The role you're in and the scenario shifts that. So if we can say, not who were they when they were filling out a multiple choice test, because that's not that relevant. I want to know what they're like when they're having business conversations. And so our system captures that in real time.
Yeah, I find I've taken a lot of those tests, and I find that like they give you like 2 or 3 choices of words, and you pick the most relevant ones, right?
Right.
So I could fudge that.
Yeah.
However, I think that company wants.
Yes.
I mean, they're cheatable.
They're totally cheatable.
Yeah.
Either one of us could take the test, and they say, "Hey, I want you to come out with this result." And if you took it 2 or 3 times, you'd be able to do that. And you could just get the result you want to get and not be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so the nice thing about our system is it just runs in the background of a Zoom conversation. So there's no UX, there's no anything that's going to distract you. It listens, and it takes the whole thing and turns that into information so that you as the host or interviewer or whatever word we want to use, you now have more objective information to make the right decision with.
Okay, so if we want to build like a process into our company, right, and we're going to utilize a strong interview process, and then layer in tools like Cyrano or like another tool on top of it, where do we start? How do we? What are the first steps, or how do we put this into play for the organization?
So the first thing to do is measure the people in the organization and understand really what that landscape is. And that's easy because you're having internal calls. So you just run the system during internal calls and you get that. And then you figure out what kind of roles you want, or in the role you're hiring for, what that needs.
Well, let's back up. So what you're saying is, what I'm hearing is that you have to understand yourself and your team first.
Totally.
Right. So and then to build these out into your values.
Yeah, they really are. Like when you think about your brand, like why your company exists and what your brand identity is, to see it, especially in startups, the company's brand identity is really an extension of the CEO or founder's identity. And that makes sense. No. But as the company grows, it is reasonable to assume that can change. And so all of a sudden you bring on a couple key hires that are leading a division of the company, and they likely are different with different personalities and priorities. And so recognizing the subculture that they've created in their department, or just, the leadership of the organization as individuals, what they prioritize and how they think through a process. Like I said, ego versus data as an example.
So they essentially are adding to the culture, or they're injecting their own values into that culture as well.
Yeah.
All right. So then you have to keep that cultural value system up to date, and you have to kind of work on it and go, hey, are these really our corporate values?
Yeah.
Now, first it was mine, but now I've added 4 executives around me.
Right.
So we need to sit down, and guys, it doesn't take very long to do that.
No.
It takes half a day.
And it's totally worth doing, because
100%.
You wouldn't want to hire, clones of yourself.
No.
You would want a diverse team that, reinforces each other.
God, I see so many organizations, though, unfortunately, that are command and control, and they just want people who can come in and do the work. Right. And they do hire like yes men and clones of themselves, and people who aren't set up for success.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, I mean, if that's what your organization is, that's fine. But you really need to look deep into whether or not you want to grow the company, and innovation spurs growth.
Yeah. And if you're a legacy company with a bunch of big contracts that exist and you just don't want anyone to rock the boat, make sure you just create, copy, paste, rinse and repeat. But especially
don't expect to grow, though.
Yeah. If you're looking for opportunities to be innovative, to be disruptive, to have healthy debates in an organization, making sure you're hiring people who approach the same problem from different perspectives is critical.
Mm-hmm. All right, so we've kind of analyzed ourselves. We have an idea of who we are and who our team is. Now, what do you do next? You profile the people that you want to hire?
Yeah. So assuming you're hiring a person for a role that already exists and is already filled, and so you're either adding a person or backfilling or something like that, you could profile that person and say, okay, we have John in this sales job, and John has this sort of graph and these sort of archetypal features. Do we want another John because he's doing great? Or do we want a person who has more XYZ? And you could just like really look at that sort of philosophically and say, what is it that makes John great at his job? And
how do you know? I mean, what you might want may not be the best thing for the company.
Sure. And that is a challenge no matter what. And so all we're doing is giving you data and saying, look, these are the things that John is good at. And because he's good at these things, here's what he's going to do when he's stressed. Here's what he's going to do when he's being creative. Here's how he works well on a team. Here's, a handful of scenarios. And so we can say, we really like the way that John does all these things, but if we could have a person who's different in this area, that would really round out our team more. Now, ultimately, that might not be correct. That might be a wrong strategy, but at least you're making a strategy based on data.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think if you're tying it back to your core company values as well, at least that person, like people can approach things or work differently and approach things from different angles. They can bring up diversity is great because when you have people from different viewpoints coming together, like, they're going to challenge each other.
Yeah.
That as long as they're sticking with the corporate values, they're holding those truth when they're decision making, then it puts you in a strong position.
And part of respecting someone or some organization is understanding how to work together when you don't agree.
Yeah.
And just saying, look, I know this is Rick, and Rick's going to do things this way. And that's great because there's all these upsides to it. It's not the way I would do things, but I trust Rick to do it because he's earned that over the course of X, Y, and Z, this time together. So when you think about that, you say, I don't need a clone of me, and I don't need a clone of Rick. Maybe I need a hybrid of both of us, or maybe I just need someone who's going to get along really well with Rick because this guy's going to be reporting to Rick anyway. And I, as the CEO, am comfortable saying, we need to grow an organization beyond just stuff that works with me. Got
it. All right. So moving on from that, then we're talking about what creating a interview process would be the next page.
Yeah. So we're doing this right now. We're doing a pilot with a large commercial retailer, and they're using our system right now in a pretty big hiring process where they've got so many applicants. What they're actually looking at is they're using some software that they create pre-scripted questions, and then the applicant just gives their answer into a webcam and just records a couple minute videos on each answer. And that's the first screening process.
See, I don't like that.
Yeah.
I don't like that because a lot of people aren't comfortable being in front of a camera. We're more of it. We're more used to it now because of Zoom. But the fact of the matter is that when you're talking to a camera and there's no interaction from another person, you're just answering questions.
Right.
It's not accurate.
Especially, yeah. And the idea of just like looking at a camera and talking into a light or a camera and trying to be emotive.
Yeah.
That's a trained skill.
Yeah.
Like you have to get good at that.
And most people aren't trained for that.
No. And most people who are good at the job you want them to be good at are good at the other job instead of that.
Exactly. All right. So we're creating we need to create a custom interview process. So what does that need to look like?
Yeah. So you could take their resume, you could take their LinkedIn profile, you could take any of that and run it through our system, with a button click. And then you're getting a profile on that person, a thumbnail sketch. And then that could help you inform you on what kinds of questions you want to ask this person about. And you could say, okay, based on their employment history and based on these psychographics, it's easy to start creating interesting insights and questions based on the combination of those things.
But it also helps you build a short list of people who you think are going to be on target.
Yeah.
And that's something I talk about a lot is target rather than kind of throwing shit at a wall and hoping something sticks,
yep.
which is what most hiring processes are.
Yeah.
You're targeting and then going after those people that you think are going to be the most accurate. And it doesn't matter where they come from. You know, if somebody comes from a job board or something like that, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, there's an argument for and against high throughput hiring, or high throughput interviewing, I guess I should say.
Yeah.
And there are some people who really want to do that and just, law of large numbers kind of thing.
Yeah,
But-
I want to see 50 candidates for this role.
right.
Oh God, that drives me. There's
So
no
what
point in it.
What else are you going to do this week?
Yeah.
Besides see those 50 candidates. And by the way, how are you going to remember the difference between, applicant 14 and, 39? Those are going to start to blur real fast. So you ate up a week or more, and it's difficult to remember who you liked more anyway.
And sometimes you'll pass on people that will end up taking a job in the process before you've had a chance to get to them.
Yeah. So you're like, hey, you were the third person we hired. We should have just hired you. We had to do the 50 because we said we would, but we want you.
Yeah.
And they were like, well, too bad. I'm already working down the street.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then or they might have accepted something else. Then you create a situation where like it's completely a transactional kind of scenario. Like they're not joining you because they want to join you. They're joining you because of the monetary compensation you throw.
And now they're not joining you because they feel wanted and special. And just, hey, you were the best we found. We didn't offer you the job quickly because we still talked to 47 other people, but eventually we got back around to you. That's not fun to go through when you're the applicant.
Yeah.
And that doesn't create the momentum you're looking for.
Do you mind if I add something to this?
Please.
So like I think that if you're actually I truly believe that like when you create an interview process, you tie the interview questions to your corporate values.
Okay.
Right. So if I'm bringing in somebody, I'll assign interviewer number 1 these 4 questions. And you don't need any more than 4 questions. I don't need to sit there and grill somebody and shotgun 20 questions off.
Right.
Just train somebody how to ask 3 to 4 questions and dig under the hood on those.
Mm-hmm.
And then what you're going to do is evaluate that person against your core values.
Yeah.
Whether or not, and we build in a knockout question. Build in a question that basically, if that person is completely unaligned with your core values, thank them for their time and release them from the process.
Yeah.
And then you're creating an interview system where like, hey, based on the data that we got from, our pre-screen or what have you. And then based on our interview, we have evidence to support either moving forward or not making the hire.
And a fast no is usually better for both parties.
Absolutely.
Right. With rare exceptions, getting a fast no is way better than a we'll see. Because then that applicant gets to move on to places where they are a fit instead of,
most
sitting and looking
applicants
at their
do
phone.
not even get a no.
Right.
They just get ghosted.
Yes.
I mean, if you talk to applicants, their number 1 complaint, I sent my resume in, I talked to them, we did a phone screen, haven't heard anything. Crickets.
Yeah.
And what does that do for your employer brand? Absolutely crushes it.
And it's so easy to say, hey, we're going in a different direction. Wish you luck.
But it's not that difficult to have a conversation with a person. And most people, if you have that conversation, they'll self-select out anyway.
And we've all been on a first date that didn't go well. Like so my wife and I met on Match.com, and we both went on a lot of dates before we found each other.
Sure.
And one of my favorite Match.com dates didn't make it to appetizers. Like this girl and I, we were kids. We sat down, we were talking, and we're like, hey, how's Match going for you? How's it going for you? We talked. Waiter came by, got drinks, and he came back and said, hey, can I get some appetizers? And she and I looked at each other, and both simultaneously were like, no, we don't need appetizers. And I looked at her and I said, I'll take care of this. And she said, thank you. I hope it goes well for you. I was like, hope it goes well for you. And she walked away. And that's one of my favorite dates I've ever been on, because it was so like equal that we were both like, this isn't the right fit, whatever it is. She was a fine person, I'm sure, but we just knew it wasn't going to work. And so we both walked away and were able to save the rest of our evening.
God, you know what? That's how you should approach your interview if you're interviewing.
Yeah.
That's how you should approach your interview. Like if you're the candidate looking for a job. And again, I think we touched upon it in our conversation. The worst thing you can do for your career is to put yourself in a position where you're not being honest.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So the last thing we do, we hire, right?
Yep. Yeah. The key to it is when we hire the person using our software, and we already touched on this, the idea is then you know how to manage that person. You know what to look for in quarterly reviews. You know what to do in all of that work so that it's not just the recruiting. There's a long tail of value and benefit.
Perfect. All right. So what would be 2 or 3 key takeaways you can give the audience that can plug into their business today?
If they're looking to hire people or if they're looking to connect with customers, either way,
Hiring.
People like people that are like themselves. So you're going to be biased to generate an echo chamber. So you need to know what you have and to recognize that just because someone's similar to you, that doesn't mean it's good. That's the main one.
Yeah, it most likely won't be.
Right. And to
you don't want clones of yourself.
And to find tools like ours, but not exclusively ours, that allows you to externalize that process so you can actually show your work. And the more you show your work, the easier it is to find flaws and better ways to do things.
Yeah, and constantly improve what you're doing. All right, we're just about out of time for today's show. Scott, thanks so much for your time investment today, and I want to welcome you to the Higher Power Radio community. Now, what would be the best way in which members of our audience can reach you?
2. One is our website, which is Cyrano.ai, and the other one
Spell
is
it out.
Cyrano. So it's like Cyrano de Bergerac, the guy with the big nose who was good at writing poems. It's a Steve Martin movie. Cyrano, Cyrano.ai, or find me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to talk.
All right. Well, I want to thank our listening audience for tuning in to this week's episode of Higher Power. Quick thanks to our team, Brian Colburn, Andrea Ballin, and Ayla Gerard. If you're listening to the podcast, please subscribe, review, and share. After all, this show's for you, and we're trying to constantly improve our content. You can join the Higher Power Radio community at Higher, H-I-R-E, Power, P-O-W-E-R, radio, R-A-D-I-O.com, or you can drop me an email at rick@stridesearch.com. Tune in next week. Our guest is going to be Tim Spiker. He is the founder and president of The Aperio. I'm your host, Rick Girard, and you have been listening to the Higher Power Radio Show. Aloha. Aloha.
Thank you for listening to Higher Power Radio. Catch our LinkedIn Live show every Tuesday at noon or download the podcast on iHeartRadio, iTunes, YouTube, or your favorite podcast platform. We appreciate you joining us on Higher Power Radio with your guide to recruitment success, Rick Girard.